Every year, dozens of journalists are killed just because of what they do. Even in a so-called Western country like Greece, the crime reporter Giorgos Karaivas was shot 3 years ago, with his death still being unresolved. Matt Sarnecki is a documentary filmmaker at the Reporters Network OCCRP. His last 2 films are about killings of journalists. Killing Pavel, about the murder of Pavel Sheremet in Ukraine, and The Killing of a Journalist, about the killing of Jan Kuciak, who was investigating organized crime, and his fiancée in Slovakia. I'm Anastasia Moumtzaki, and I met Matt just before the screening of his last film at the International Journalism Week of iMEdD here in Athens. We talked about the people's trust, the corruption of power, and why he would never again do a film about a journalist being killed. Okay, so Matt, welcome at Small Talk, and thank you for being here. 2 of your movies are about journalists that have been killed. Mm-hmm. And how hard is it to document such things, the killing of colleagues?
Well, first of all, yes, I've done 2 films about the murder of journalists. I want to make clear that this is not my beat. I will never do a film about this again. It just happened by coincidence. I mean, more of it after I was successful in making a documentary about the murdered journalist Pavel Sheremet in Kiev in 2016. Some of his colleagues and friends thought I could help on looking into the murder of Jan Kuciak and his fiancée in 2018. It's more of you can't say no when someone asks you for help, but I don't want to do it again. There are other...
Why?
It's like, do you want to have I don't want to have a reputation of whenever a journalist dies, call Matt Sarnecki. That's not, you don't want to be that person. And, you want to, I want to look at things that are important, but don't have the same depth of sadness that goes along with the murder of a journalist. I don't want to have to relive it with the families and the colleagues and going over and over and over this again. It's a very hard for them, and it's not easy as a human being to repeat this over and over and over. And there are plenty of subjects there are plenty of other subjects in the world of organized crime and corruption to look at.
Well, both of those films, and I'm talking about Killing Pavel, which was released in 2018, and The Killing of a Journalist, which is released this year. And I would like you to tell us a little bit about both stories, but also it's crazy because both stories, they have to do with with very sensitive matters and with matters that might put you at risk to talk about. And I wanted to know if you were scared or afraid in any part of this process. And what does your family say about working on this kind of stories? Are they afraid?
Mm-hmm. Well, these are 2 very different stories. The case with Sheremet and the case with Kuciak. They might not seem so when you're watching the film, but with the case of Sheremet, the alleged masterminds had not been apprehended, and we started identifying people that could be involved in the crime. This was before the publication. So this was a video investigation, and the stakes felt a lot higher because we didn't know if there was involvement by the Ukrainian security services in this murder. Did they know what we know? And there was a lot of paranoia, just walking down the street, checking into hotel rooms. I mean, there is that sense that, what is that knock on the door? Going to this last documentary with Kuciak, it felt very, very different. One, this is in the European Union, and for all its faults, you do feel have a better degree of security in the European Union. 2, the alleged mastermind and his crew had already been apprehended and charged by the time we really got into this documentary. I felt a lot more comfortable. But to answer your question, yeah, my mom does ask that question, and people ask this a lot, and I always tell her, Mom, I'm probably like 5 or 6. If they're gonna make a list and figure out who needs to go in order for this problem to go away. They're the journalists on the ground that are the really courageous ones that are, knocking on the doors and asking the tough questions. They're the ones that deserve the all the accolades and the awards for doing this work. I'm just working with them to bring this to the video medium, and I think once it's on TV, it's probably too late for them to do much, and I don't feel too much at risk.
So you have a kind of immunity because you are releasing it, and
it's to some extent, once it's out, what can you do? But every case is different. Every criminal is different. Sometimes we say it's the I don't want to say this is a blanket truth, but actually the very intelligent criminals are the ones you have to worry about least because they know the consequences of harming a journalist. It's the criminals with probably a lesser degree of education that just don't give a shit that you might have to worry about because they don't even understand the concept of what journalism is, and they might equate you with an organized crime rival, and your death obviously might the death of a journalist in the EU might be receive more attention or become something bigger than just if your average Joe criminal were killed.
Yeah. Well, so tell us about OCCRP. You are a member of this network of journalists. What do they do, and how did you start working on such cases?
Oh, it's a difficult question, but it's long. It takes a little bit of time. And I am always told after I explain what OCCRP is that I didn't explain it correctly. But for the way that I look at it is, it's a large consortium of investigative centers, mostly in Central and Eastern Europe. Now it's grown a bit. It's in Africa, Latin America. We used to have partners in Russia, but due to the situation, that's no longer the case. And the original idea of it was we would have all these individual centers across Central and Eastern Europe. They would collaborate on cross-border stories of crime and organized corruption. Because the way crime works now is it's not in a single country, it's transnational. If you want to launder money, you don't necessarily do it in your own country. You'll rent some property in another country that company is going to have a director in the Bahamas or something else. And it was an idea like, let's tackle organized crime cross borders and work together. The founder of OCCRP, or one of the founders, his name is Paul Radu. He's from Romania. And he shared the Daniel Pearl Investigative Journalism Award with one of my professors at Berkeley, and her name was Mimi Chikarova. And she knew that I already spoke Romanian, and she said, hey, let me put you together with this guy named Paul. He's a really interesting guy. He's doing some interesting things. And I met with Paul, and the idea was to start a video department. Could see that these were a lot of great stories that just had no coverage in let's say for a Western audience. These were almost a story like this, what happened in Slovakia with Jan Kuciak. People in Europe don't even remember or know that this happened. So it was working with this group, these journalists that were working at these various investigative centers to find these great stories and to bring them to life in video.
And how does it feel that these stories are not so well known in Europe? I mean, seeing the movie The Killing of a Journalist, one could feel like, this is crazy what happened in Slovakia.
Well, I think that's the response when people see it there. It's more of like, what the fuck? This happened?
Exactly.
How did I not know about this? I think there was a similar reaction to the film Collective, which took place in Romania, where you saw this horrific event that led to a reckoning within the establishment, and it brought down the government, and just blatant corruption that made you, almost like laugh and cry at the same time. And this is another story with very different in how it's told and very different with the consequences at the end. But I think that's one of the important things about film and documentary, and looking at, conferences like this that allow us to, spread the word and show these stories.
Yeah.
I think one of the problems with this story is it took place over the course of, we're talking about like from the day of the murder to now, it's almost been 5 years. And it's taking all these small bits that, developed over time and bringing them together to show kind of a wild story of what the fuck happened in this country. But it also starts much earlier than that. If we want to talk about like what are the corrupt innards or what are the corrupt beginnings of this, this captured state, it starts, much earlier.
But I think from your experience also from OCCRP, I think you could answer that. There is this general feeling that, all governments are corrupt and there is corruption everywhere and all governments and all politicians are the same. So, and also somebody mentions that in your film as well, that as far as we have food on the table, we don't care if they are liars or if they steal or if they have connections with the mafia. How do you feel when you see this kind of mentality?
Well, I mean, that's one of the saddest. It's one of the saddest truths on earth. But I don't think it's unique to Central or Eastern Europe. When we look at the rise of these populist governments that are doing some really crazy things, with Bolsonaro in Latin America and Trump in the United States. And there are plenty of examples, with Orban and the European Union and Russia. These are global trends that to me are very, very sad when people can forget what makes democracy and what makes, freedom something worth fighting for. When we've come to a situation where forget values, forget having a moral compass, forget what's right or wrong. Let's favor stability because it's easy. But I also sympathize with that at the same time because, when you need to put food on your table, that's survival. And that comes first for a lot of people.
But do you feel like, there are many stories that we hear in many different countries that governments and people in positions in power, they have connections and they communicate with mafia. Do you think that this is the norm? This is like in the nature of power in some way, or am I too pessimistic?
I really hope not. The problem is I'm a little bit pessimistic. No, I think there are good people and there are bad people. I don't want to lump it into like black and white. What I think is interesting about this story, in particular in Slovakia, is it's what one of the protagonists says. We always kind of assumed it. There was this kind of conspiracy theory. I don't want to say conspiracy theory. There were so many rumors and circumstantial pieces of evidence that this was happening, that the oligarchs were basically working hand in hand with politicians to, let's say, rule the country in a way. When this happened, when in the middle of the documentary, for those who haven't seen it, the text messages of the alleged mastermind are leaked, and we can see that he was collaborating with many high-up officials, politicians, judges, and members of the police. It was like, shit, it's really as bad as we thought. Everything
even
was
worse.
Like,
it's breathtaking.
It's even worse. It's like, wow, like you couldn't even think it was that bad. It's tremendously sad. I hope that's not the norm. I haven't seen evidence that that's the norm, but I think it speaks to the importance of having strong democratic institutions that don't allow for, systems like this to develop.
Sure, but still, you in OCCRP, you can see that in the case of Pavel Serement, you have done a forensic evidence investigation that was almost like police work. So one could say that you do the work that the police should have done. And how does this feel?
Well, I think it's, it is supposed to be a check on government. That's what journalism is. That's one role that it's supposed to have. So if the police don't do their job, of course, it's our job to do their job to show it's possible. I mean, and to elicit the proper outrage when it's like, hey, in the case of Sheremit, why didn't the police do all this work? Why are journalists doing it? I think in that case, we kind of served as a check on the police, and a lot has changed in Ukraine since that time.
Yeah, of
so
course.
it's hard to talk about that case now that we have war. But I think I would hope that some of the work we did elicit change inside the police department.
You're doing a great job with OCCRP, and there are many people, many journalists, like at least 40 journalists have been killed since the beginning of the year, according to RSF. And, you know, it makes me feel like, is it worth it? Because people still doesn't trust us journalists. And we have also this research that has been released during our journalism week here. First of all, why journalists are a target?
Well, that's a very, very big question.
We don't have the time to think.
No, I think it goes back to the kind of institutions you have. If there is not going to be any response to killing a journalist, it can become convenient to kill a journalist. If we look at Russia over the past 10 years, for example, many investigative journalists have been killed, and the alleged mastermind has never been identified. So why do people kill journalists in Russia? Because there's no revenge, there's no impunity, there's no reason not to if they're a thorn in your side.
But why are we a target?
Why are we a target? Because we're a threat to power. Of course, that's. I don't think there's. I don't think there's a doubt about that. But the point that I was saying, that happened in Russia. In the EU, we have 2 or 3. The most prominent investigative journalists that were murdered in the last few years were Daphne in Malta and Jan in Slovakia. At least in those cases, the alleged mastermind has been identified and charged, which actually speaks to the power of democratic institutions. Because now, whenever someone wants to kill a journalist who has some intelligence, they're going to realize, well, the alleged mastermind has at least been charged inside the European Union. Like I said, but every case is also different. I said, if you have someone who's not really thinking about consequences so much and doesn't realize that, killing a journalist is different than killing a rival, there's just too much variation. But going back to the point, I think strong civil society, strong democratic values, strong rule of law are deterrents to killing a journalist.
And then why do people don't trust us? I mean, the figures say that the audience doesn't trust journalism, and
Well,
is it like a paradox there?
I mean, it's so wholeheartedly, sadly ironic. Well, I think you have to look at, there are a lot of politicians out there that say journalists are the enemy of the people. And if you look at who's saying that, oftentimes they themselves have a history that, sometimes overlaps with organized crime or crimes in general. They don't care about, like I said, the rule of law or the vibrancy of democracy or any of these things. They care about themselves and re-election. So demonizing journalism, and if journalism is not respected, it's not going to, hurt their fortune in any way. When people don't know what the truth is, it's actually going to help them. When people just say, I don't know, it's too complicated, everyone's corrupt, that is the goal of a corrupt politician that is actively working on a disinformation campaign, to just assume that everyone's corrupt. The truth is impossible to detect. There's not enough evidence, and therefore we can't know the truth. So it's just easiest back how it was when it was stable. Mm-hmm. That goes back to answer your question about why people want stability. They remember stability. They have a nostalgia for it, and they don't know exactly what's happening now.
Sure.
I was talking with a Russian colleague, and we're still on friendly terms despite everything. And she's, we send reports back and forth, and she's like, I just don't know what to believe anymore. And that's really, really, really scary, when we're talking about like Russians, when they hear about Bucha and they say, oh, that was staged. Or, the story keeps on changing. It's like all that they hear is that it was staged by the West.
Yes.
And it's hard for us to say, like, look at all of this various evidence that we're putting in forth you. It's completely clear that this took place. It's like, oh, but there are these other stories that say, look at this. Did you see that person moved? It's not 100% clear. I'm quoting them. And then it's just like it's so sad that people can't work with the best available evidence. But that is the goal of, a dictator that wants to retain power. Disinformation allows people just not to be sure. And maybe it's impossible for them. It's impossible to know. So who cares? I'll go on with my life.
Well, thank you for this. We wish you good luck in everything, and we look forward to the screening of the movie.
No, thank you so much for having me.
The interview was conducted in person at the International Journalism Week 2022, organized by iMEdD in Athens. Sound design and mixing by Aris Athanasopoulos. For more audio content by iMEdD, please visit podcast.imed.org.